Howdy, friends. I'm Joel Empey, and welcome to another episode of Joel Empey Talks Mixed Martial Arts. And on today's episode, we're going to look forward to UFC Copenhagen. It's actually a banger of a card. It's not really getting the credit that it deserves at the moment. We're going to take a look back at UFC Mexico City. So it's a typical type of episode, but first, I want to talk about the hottest topic in the sport right now, and that's eye pokes. Now, if you've watched the last 2 weekends of UFC, 2 weekends ago, UFC Vancouver, main card fight, Todd Duffy versus Jeff Hughes, and the fight gets ended in the first round because of an eye poke from Jeff Hughes onto Todd Duffy. And if you watched this past weekend, main event fight, Yair Rodriguez versus Jeremy Stephens, it was, by far the best fight on the card. It was an extremely good main event on paper. Everybody was dying to see it. That card was also a little bit of a lackluster card, especially compared to like the free card coming up this weekend in UFC Copenhagen. And everybody was really that card was really all about the main event, and it was tragically finished about 15 seconds into the fight when Yair Rodriguez accidentally poked Jeremy Stephens in the eye. Now, if you're one of the people out there that's saying, Todd Duffy or Jeremy Stephens, that they're faking it or they're wimps for backing out of the fight because they got poked in the eye, then you're the scum of the earth. And I'm not exaggerating. You're just a bad MMA fan if you think that Jeremy Stephens quit because he didn't want to fight. Jeremy Stephens is the quintessential fighter in the UFC. He's got some of the most experience in the entire game. Jeremy Stephens didn't even realize that you could turn down fights. There was a famous interview where somebody asked him about if he ever thought about turning down a particular opponent because it was a bad stylistic matchup, and he deadpan said, "I didn't even know we could turn down fights." He didn't realize that was even a possibility. He's a guy who's fought at 55, he's fought at 45, one of the toughest fighters in the history of the sport, one of the most violent, reckless fighters in the history of the sport. He obviously didn't quit out there. He couldn't open his eye. Herb Dean did a masterful job refereeing in that situation and maximizing Jeremy Stephens' opportunity to try to recover, and he just couldn't recover. So that fight I actually saw today is rebooked for UFC Boston here shortly. It's going to be a co-main event fight, and I'm still very excited for that matchup. I can't wait to see it. But the underlying issue here isn't, that Jeremy Stephens or Todd Duffy aren't tough guys. Like that blows my mind that anybody would even think that that's a story. Even if one of them did quit. Like, the fact that you're going to call out a UFC fighter for not being a tough guy is just the most ridiculous thing that a fan could possibly do. And this issue is a fundamental issue of the sport, eye pokes. And it goes deeper than, just the glove technology, which I'm going to get into. It goes into the scoring criteria of the sport and judging being fundamentally flawed because it's a borrowed system from boxing, the 10-point must system for scoring rounds and fights, and it's just antiquated. It's not the way that MMA fights should be judged, and that's really the reason why. Like, when you boil down the issue, it's the judging criteria of the fight that really affects eye pokes, and the glove technology for sure is also a major thing that affects eye pokes in a fight, obviously. So those are the two things that you really need to look at fixing if you want to eradicate the sport of eye pokes, because obviously it's a real issue. 2 high-profile fights in back-to-back weeks, main card fights. In the case of Jeremy Stephens, Yair Rodriguez, a main event fight had to be stopped in the first round because of eye pokes. And the UFC is in a 5-week stretch right now. They're in Abu Dhabi, a few weeks ago. They're in Vancouver, Canada, Mexico City, Copenhagen, and then Melbourne, Australia. 5 consecutive weeks. That's their schedule. The UFC, as an entity and a corporation, is just treading water. All they can do is market fights and put on fights and try to gather and negotiate with talent in order to fill out these cards. They do a card damn near every single weekend. It's a worldwide sport, as I just mentioned. Abu Dhabi, Canada, Mexico, Copenhagen, Denmark, and Australia in a 5-week stretch. They're international. They can't spend their time trying to worry about the rules of the sport and stuff like that. And it's really sad because the UFC is the leader of mixed martial arts, obviously, and what they do really determines how the sport develops. And they're uninterested in starting a 165-pound weight class, and that's, I think, really stifling the growth of the sport. They're unwilling to look into judging criteria and things like that, and I think that's stifling the growth of the sport. And when I say judging criteria has a lot to do with the eye pokes, I'll get into that in a second. First, I want to talk about glove design a little bit. I just wish that somebody won championship or PFL or Bellator or KSW. There's so many other big MMA organizations out there. Even smaller MMA organizations, like a Titan, or, like the middle sort of level, like UFC's top, and then there was the organizations I just described, and then there's, the Titan FCs and things of that nature. I wish somebody would just try some different gloves so we could have some data on it and actually see, what percentage, compare eye poke percentages in like UFC fights to, what the new glove design would be. And, I don't know what the new glove design could be exactly, but, maybe a glove that covered over the fingers, just went to like the first digit type of a situation. So you had a full padding over top to there, but then this whole middle part of the fingers would be open, so you could still grab for being able to, grab your own bicep or be able to grab for wrestling. But, there'd be padding over the top, so that way you can't extend your fingers and poke somebody in the eye. It would just be a flat, soft, leathery, padded sort of material there, maybe with like an elastic band across the bottom digits of the fingers, to keep your hand firmly entrenched inside the finger ends. I don't know if that's a good idea or not. I would like to see it tried, something like that, or even, Everlast has created a glove before that just nobody's tried. And it just kind of goes up to sort of the middle digit of the fingers. So the tops of the fingers are still exposed, but it goes to the middle digit of the fingers and it forces your hand into a bit more of a curved position. So if you think about it, like when you stick your hand outward to, you wouldn't be able to poke your fingers straight out thusly, like your fingers would have a bit of a curve to them. So you wouldn't have the same kind of eye pokes. And you could say, hey, fighters, why don't you just close your hands? The thing is if you close your hands, you're literally, this might sound crazy, but you're literally not as agile. If your fists are clenched, that's like, it's a message to your body that you're in a tense position when your fists are clenched. And when you're tense, you can't move as smoothly. You're not as agile. It's like when you're stretching. If you're ever foam rolling and you're making you're grimacing while you're foam rolling over a particular part of your body, you're actually not going to be able to fully stretch out that part of your body that you're trying to foam roll out. That myofascial release, your body won't release. If you're gritting your teeth and you're working against it, you have to actually smile and have like a positive attitude about it. I know it sounds crazy, but it's actually scientifically true. You can't have a proper myofascial release if you're having a negative reaction to it as it's happening. You need to smile, you need to relax, and that's going to allow the muscle to stretch itself out on like the foam roller or lacrosse ball, softball, whatever you're doing. That's a tip if you are a kind of guy who likes to foam roll and you're foam rolling over your hammy or your quad, and it's tight, and you're grating your teeth about it, you're actually doing yourself a disservice. You won't be able to get the same kind of myofascial release if you're like that. And it's the same thing. If you close your fist, it's a sign to your body that you're in a tense position and you won't be able to flow as smoothly. So telling a fighter to simply close their hands, that's an unreasonable thing to ask of a fighter. So we need to improve the glove technology to stop it. The other thing that the reason why I'll go into the judging now. The reason why judging plays a major factor in this is that referees are intimidated to take a point because of the 10-point must system. The fact that over 90% of MMA fights are only 3 rounds. If you take a point from a guy in MMA where you only have 3 rounds, you're screwing that person over. Like, you're immediately, if they lose a round, the best they can do is draw, because if they lose a round, it's a 10-9, and now you've taken a point away, it's a 10-8. Even if they win the next 2 rounds of the fight, the best they can do is draw. So unless if they can score a 10-8, but you get the point. It's a significant thing to take a point away in mixed martial arts because you only have 3 rounds to work compared to boxing. You have 10 or 12 rounds. If you take a point away, you can make that up in the later rounds. Like if you watch Floyd Mayweather fight, even against like the Conor McGregor fight, for example, if you're an MMA guy, I'm sure you watched that fight. Floyd gave away the first 4 rounds of that fight because he didn't need to win them. He didn't need to try in them. He just let Conor punch himself out. He let him work himself into exhaustion because he knew he was going to have 8 rounds after that. Like, you can't just take rounds off in MMA. The scoring it's too important. So a referee knows that, so they're intimidated to take a point from fighters. A possible solution to this would be, just don't change the judging at all, which is, the likeliest of scenarios because there'd be so much that would have to go into changing the judging. But instead of taking points away for infractions, just take money away. And I hate to try to take money away from a fighter, but at least if you're taking money away, you're giving it to the other fighter. Like Pride used to have back in the day, they used to have a yellow card system for people who were stalling or whatever. And if you got a yellow card, you forfeited 10% of your purse to the opponent. What if you had infractions in MMA where if you kick a guy in the nuts or you poke him in the eye or you grab the fence, it's immediately, if the referee determines it to be a minor infraction or a major infraction, let's say a minor infraction, you automatically forfeit 5% of your purse for any infraction. I bet people, if their money was on the line, they would make damn sure that they weren't poking eyes. And I don't think people are poking eyes on purpose, but they would be extra making sure that they aren't poking eyes. And then, you can make it like 10% for a major infraction. Like when Jeff Hughes poked Todd Duffy's eye, like Todd Duffy is obviously in a very bad way. If you took 10% off of Jeff Hughes in that moment, it would be a bit of a consolation for Todd Duffy, and it would make a guy like Jeff Hughes, which I don't think he was dirty, I don't think he did that on purpose, but it would make guys extra diligent and extra careful about making sure that they didn't commit any infractions. And I understand, infractions are 99.9% of the time they're accidental, but if you had some kind of disincentive to committing fouls, like a monetary type of situation, I think that might actually go a long way towards stopping fighters. And, that would be a very quick and easy stopgap, like completely revamping the judging criteria and the way that judging goes down would be extremely expensive. It would be extremely time consuming. It would take an extremely long trial period to even see if it's working or not. And it would require constant tweaking. So it's just not realistic to think that judging is going to change, even though it should have changed so long ago. It's really kind of pathetic and pitiful that it's just a borrowed system from boxing. But yeah, that's my opinion on eye pokes. I'm very excited that Jeremy Stevens and Yair Rodriguez is going to be ran back at UFC Boston. Co-main event. Main event, I believe, is Dominic Reyes and Chris Weidman making his 205-pound debut. That's going to be a hell of a card down the line. I forget when that is exactly, but it's coming up here in the not too distant future. And now Yair Rodriguez and Jeremy Stevens, there's even more juice for it. So like, in a weird way, even though it's going to be a co-main now, like the fight's even bigger. There's a little bit of controversy around it. That UFC Boston card is going to be really exciting. I'm super looking forward to it. So yeah, that's my opinion on eye pokes. I think it's ultimately a judging problem, and also, it's a glove technology problem. I really wish that some organization would at least attempt some different gloves. At least attempt maybe I'm not saying that taking money away from fighters or doing like that idea is the answer, but I'm just trying to think out loud here and try to come up with some kind of solution, because the way that the sport is right now is clearly not working. All right, now let's look back at UFC Mexico City. I'm going to talk about a few of the fights from that night. Obviously, the main event, there's not too much to talk about. It was 15 seconds and it ended in an eye poke, but one fight I really wanted to touch on was the Steven Peterson versus Martin Bravo. That was just a phenomenal fight, phenomenal finish. Steven Peterson showed an extreme heart in that one. They were talking openly on the broadcast about how he admittedly had a terrible weight cut, and it was at altitude. Having a bad weight cut at altitude had to be so draining for him. He apparently had to get an enema to lose the last bit of weight in order for him to make the weight, and he did it like a true pro. And he was getting pieced up in that first round. Bravo looked sensational. When I was watching that and I heard that Peterson had a tough weight cut, the Bravo's pressure and his striking and his distance was really masterful in that first round. And I was just like waiting for Steven Peterson to get knocked out. It seemed like only an inevitability. It seemed like only a matter of time. And then in the second round, Peterson, timed as Bravo tried a spinning back fist on Peterson. Peterson evaded it and simultaneously swung into his own spinning back fist and KO'd Bravo in what was probably one of the top 5 knockouts of the year. I think Masvidal firmly cemented himself as knockout of the year when he flying kneed Ben Askren in 5 seconds. But the way Bravo got that knockout, that was one of the best knockouts of the year. If you didn't see it, I highly suggest looking up the highlights, Steven Peterson versus Martin Bravo. And one thing I want to say about that spinning back fist, it was, people like Paige Van Zandt and Paul Felder have broken their arms on spinning back fists in fairly recent history. And one thing that I noticed about Steven Peterson, I think this is an important distinction with a spinning back fist, was that if you watched when his hand hit the chin of Bravo, his knuckles were to the sky. It wasn't actually the back of the fist. It was the side of the fist, like a hammer fist. And I think that your arm is a lot more durable and a lot less likely to break in the forearm. And I think it's also, if you step on a single nail, the nail is going to puncture your foot, right? But if you step on a bed of nails, like a shitload of nails, for lack of a better term, the pressure will disperse more evenly, and it's not going to penetrate your foot in the same kind of a way. And I think it's the same thing with like the surface area. If you're just looking at the surface area of the side of your hand, that's significantly smaller than the surface area of the back of your hand. So I think that the power is a lot more concentrated when your knuckles up on a spinning back fist. That was just a note that I wanted to put out there that I noticed from that fight. I think it's just an interesting thing to look at going forward when you watch people do spinning back fists. And if you watched Felder or Van Zandt when they broke their arms, their back fists were straight up, and their arm was more fully extended, rather than having like a slight bend in it. So those are both factors, I think, into why their arms broke in that. And one of the reasons why Steven Bravo just Steven Peterson just absolutely flatlined Bravo with that spinning back fist, because it was just it's so much more concentrated coming in on a smaller surface area like the side of your hand compared to the back of your hand. Now, the other two fights I want to talk about are the Brandon Moreno versus Askar Askarov. That was a phenomenal fight. And then the co-main event between Carlos Esparza and Alexa Grasso. So first, the Brandon Moreno and Askar Askarov fight. That was a dog fight. Both these guys are going to be really quality fighters in the flyweight division. Moreno and Cejudo are obviously very close. So I don't think Moreno is going to ever challenge for the title as long as Cejudo's the champ. But both these guys are very talented guys that could be coming down the pipe as flyweight contenders. The fact that the fight ended in a draw, benefits both of them. Neither guy had to take an L, so they can both. I think they can both actually move forward in the division after this if they don't do a rematch. Which I think I would. I would actually be down to see a rematch because I think it was a phenomenal fight, and I would love to watch those guys fight again. But I'd also like to watch those guys both take a step forward and take on some different top 10 contenders at flyweight. Let's make flyweight great again. Let's make it great again. After the UFC tried to destroy it, Cejudo saved it. And I love watching these guys fight. They just have unlimited cardio. They have, ridiculous flexibility, and they're so talented everywhere. Gravity just doesn't work against you in the same way as when you get to the higher weight classes. So the things that these guys can do at flyweight is just spectacular. I want to talk about the judging in that fight, though. That was a really bad decision. Like, I thought Moreno really clearly won the second and the third round, and the first round was pretty close. Like, you could have given that to Askarov, you could have given that to Moreno. I gave it to Askarov, and then I gave the next 2 rounds to Moreno. But the judges' scorecards, so one of them was 2-1 for Moreno. I can see that. Was 3-0 for Moreno. And like I said, I could see that because I could see Moreno having potentially won that first round. Even though I scored about 29-28, I could conceive of a 30-27 scorecard. And then 29-28 for Askarov. It's like, how do you give Askarov the second or the third round? I just don't see that. It wasn't that's not the most egregious bad decision I've ever seen, but that's a pretty bad decision. But the scorecard that just grinds my gears that I just can't get over is the 28-28. I've tried looking online to see if there's a picture of the scorecard. If you've seen a picture of the scorecard, please send it to me. Please post it in the comments below, because I would love to see how the hell that fight was scored 28-28. So, it was a 10-8 round? One of them got a 10-8 round? Or... what? How could that have possibly... Nobody earned a 10-8 round. Moreno won the second and the third round, but he didn't blow Askarov out of the water by any stretch. And then that first round was probably the closest round in the fight. Like I said, I had Askarov winning that one slightly. But for 28-28 to come out as a score, that's just pathetic judging. I understand that the fans are also really, so Bravo gets knocked out viciously. That judging in that Moreno fight was horrendous. That was a robbery. And then I can see, why people were upset about the Grasso Esparza decision. I thought that was a pretty good decision. I also scored that fight a draw, so I could understand, the draw scorecard. But Carla clearly won the first 2 rounds, and Grasso clearly won the third round, so 29-28 for Esparza. That also made sense. And I think that, and then the eye poke, so Bravo getting knocked out, that's a Mexican fighter getting knocked out. And then we had the terrible Moreno decision, that's a Mexican fighter getting screwed over by the judges. Then the Grasso fight, wasn't the decision that the fans wanted. They're a little bit justified in that. That was, that was a draw in my mind, that fight. So, I can understand the fans being displeased with that. And then, the eye poke at the end of the night, I think it was really all of those things adding up that caused the fan disarray at the end and them to throw stuff. That was a really sad scene that they were all throwing shit, but at the end of the day, in Mexico there's riots at soccer games, on the regular. Um, I've worked some like international soccer competition types of games. You're not even like allowed to show replays. They're not allowed to show replays in Mexican soccer. In South America in general, they don't even show replays because of the controversy that it could incite a potential riot. So if you were really surprised that they were throwing stuff at the end of the night there, you're naive. That's the way that it is down there. The UFC seemed to have done a pretty good job with the security. I heard Carla Esparza, got a beer poured on her, which is totally not cool, but nothing super serious happened to anybody. Nobody got seriously injured, from the UFC. I'm not sure about, fans and stuff like that. It was a sad scene to see, but if you didn't see that potentially coming when you go to Mexico and you have Mexican fighters on the card like that, you have to understand that if things don't go well for the Mexican fighters on the card, that's a very real possibility. And if you don't want that to happen, then you simply just can't put on fight cards in Mexico, or at least, be stacked with that many Mexican fighters, because they're a passionate fan base and it's what they do. It's their MO. You're naive if you were surprised by that. So that's my tirade on that. Now let's get into the Alexa Grasso-Carla Esparza fight. Like I said, it scored the first 2 rounds for Carla. I think everybody did. Like all the judges did for sure. And that third round, man, that third round is why women's mixed martial arts is amazing. It's why MMA is one of the sports in the world where watching the women compete can be just as exciting as watching the men compete, because the way that Carla Esparza was able to let her elbow hyperextend, like it bent the wrong way. This is another one. If you didn't see this fight, you missed out, because you missed something incredible in that third round. Her elbow bent the wrong way. You only see that with women. Like Miesha Tate versus Ronda Rousey too. We saw Miesha, get her arm freaking hyperextended, ligaments torn all up in there, and she didn't tap. If that's a man's arm, your ligaments aren't tearing and shit. Your elbow is just snapping. Like there's a weird thing with women's arms where they're just not as rigid. Like they can bend the wrong way. Like it's mind-blowing. It's excruciatingly painful for the person who has to endure through it. But their elbow just doesn't seem to snap. Like a man's arm snaps like a twig. A woman's arm can just hyperextend the wrong way. And ligaments, I'm sure, are tearing, and I'm sure it's just brutal and excruciating. But, Carla Esparza showed the will of a true warrior there, and she knew she was up 2 rounds in that fight, and she just sucked it up and let her arm get absolutely hyperextended. Grasso couldn't have had that armbar any deeper, and you could see in the first round, even when Carla took Grasso down, Grasso was looking for that armbar. That must be her specialty. That must be her special technique off her back. Her go-to special technique, because she's obviously a boxer primarily, but we saw her, go for that armbar over and over in that fight and sort of concede a takedown, I felt like, in the first round, in order to, maybe it was the second round, but at one point, it seemed like she definitely just conceded the takedown rather than fighting a takedown off, so she could try to attack with that armbar. You could even, it was funny, it was at the end of the fight when Grasso didn't win the fight, she just kind of shrugged it off, because it was like, yeah, whatever, man. Like, at least I didn't tear the shit out of the ligaments in my arm. Like, for her, Carla was wearing the damage so much worse at the end of that fight. So I could have seen if it was, Pride rules. If you don't know, back in Japan in the Pride days, they used to score the fight as a whole which I actually kind of like that as well, rather than like round by round scoring, and then you just, like a robot add those rounds up. And, whatever the outcome, whatever the summation of like, the scores are, that's who, whoever has the higher summation of the 3 rounds, that person wins, like automatically. They would look at the fight as a whole. And I think in a Pride fight, Grasso would have won because she was stinging Carla on the feet there in the 3rd round. And she freaking damn near ripped her arm off and took it home as a trophy. Which is why I thought that 3rd round should have been a 10-8 round and the fight should have ultimately been a draw. But, I don't think either lady lost stock in those performances. I think that they both kind of gained stock in that performance. Carla got the W under her belt. Alexa Grasso, sure, she lost, but she showed that she's got, legit jiu-jitsu off her back. She showed that she has big power for the division, stinging Carla very badly with the hands. And, that was just a great fight. Rightfully so. It won fight of the night. $50K for both those ladies. And, I can't wait to watch both of those ladies compete again. The women's mixed martial arts is amazing. If you're sleeping on the women, stop. Especially the strawweight division. That is a phenomenal division. There are a ton of exciting contenders. It is just deep and stacked. And, it's with the 35 and the 25 division with Nunes and Shevchenko on the top of those. Both those girls seem so dominant that it's tough. Like, I don't see really, like, I definitely don't see anybody being able to challenge Valentina Shevchenko. I think she's the best woman on the planet. Top 5 pound for pound fighter. I think she's better than Amanda Nunes and beat Amanda Nunes in that second fight. Very clearly. It was just a bad decision. And then Amanda Nunes, like, I don't see anybody being able to beat her at 35 either. So 115 though, man, that the title in, Rose had it, she beat Joanna, defended it against Joanna, then immediately lost it. So she only beat the woman that she took the title from in title defenses, So, not a long championship run. Then Andrade gets it off of Rose, and then she immediately loses it to Zhang Wei Li, and then there's Tatiana Suarez and Nina Ansaroff, and Joanna's still in the mix, and Andrade can come back, and Rose can come back, and we've got Esparza who's looking better than ever. I mean, that division is stacked. Women's MMA is super fun to watch, particularly in the strawweight division. Now I want to talk about UFC Copenhagen. It's coming up this weekend. It's an early start, which is always fun. A nice 2 p.m. start for the main card, and I've heard some reporters and MMA media, say like, oh yeah, it's just another free card, not super excited about it. And that's just a lazy take. I mean, if you look at the main card of this free show, like, I don't understand how you're not excited about that. Like, every fight basically on the main card, the co-main event is the only one I'm not super excited for. We'll get to that. But every other fight on the main card is a legitimate banger that I'm very excited to see. I think the MMA media is just looking ahead to Izzy and Whitaker coming down the line here in a couple weeks in Australia, and that's such a banger of a card. And I think that there's just so many cards that, if it's not like a big pay-per-view, people are just like, oh, it's not a big pay-per-view, so it's not that great of a card. And I'll admit, UFC Mexico City, that was not a great card. That was really just the main event, and that was an absolute banger. Co-main was a fight that I was excited for. That's why I broke it down last week. And then there was a couple of other fights that, generated, a reasonable amount of excitement. But this main card, I'm going to go through all the fights here because this main card is phenomenal. So the first fight on the main card is Nicholas Dalby versus Alex Oliveira, aka the Brazilian Cowboy. And if you've never watched Alex Oliveira fight, he is literally one of the most exciting fighters in the entire sport. He's always coming in, dancing on his way to the octagon, and he's having fun, he's vibing, he's flowing, he's salsaing, and then he goes in there and he just throws caution to the wind. Like, he lives up to the Cowboy moniker. He's never had a boring fight, and he's starting the main card off with a bang. putting him as the first fight of the night on the main card, that's a very great decision by the UFC, because anybody who's tuning in, they're not going to want to change the channel after they watch Cowboy fight. So that's how the fight card is starting. Nicholas Dalby, Denmark guy, he's been in the UFC, he's been away from the UFC for a little while. He fought Darren Till to a draw, a little while back in his previous stint with the UFC. Now he's back in the UFC, and he's going to be looking to, put on a show in front of his hometown. And he's got a perfect dance partner to go with in the Cowboy of Brazil. Now, the next fight is Michael Oleksiejczuk. I think that's how you say it. He's a Polish guy. Very hard to pronounce last name. Oleksiejczuk, I think is how it's pronounced. And he's taking on OSP. And OSP is obviously a staple of the light heavyweight division. If you're, a serious MMA fan, you obviously know about OSP. He's a guy who's, fought John Jones, challenged for the title. He's, got, several exciting wins by an unorthodox choke, the Von Flue choke, that they kind of have renamed into the Von Prue choke after him. Because it was originally named after a guy named Von Flue. Anyways, this guy Michael Oleksiejczuk, he's 24 years old at light heavyweight, so he's just a young blood up and comer type of a guy that could be along with the Dominic Reyeses and the Johnny Walkers and Alexander Rakic's of the light heavyweight division, this next crop of young up and coming contenders. And, this is his big chance to break into the top 10, top 5 type of an area. Because if you can beat OSP, you're like a top 5 type of a guy. If he can beat OSP, and he's won so far, Oleksiejczuk has fought 2 times in 2019, and he's won both of them by first round knockout and in a total of less than 2.5 minutes. Like, both fights put together equals less than 2.5 minutes. So he's, proven that he's deserves to be on the fast track here, and they're trying to do it with him against OSP. So this is his big chance. And if he can pass it, we got another young and exciting contender, 24-year-old contender at the light heavyweight division that desperately needs some new blood. And like I said, there's Reyes and Rakic and Walker as these new blood type of guys. Oleksiejczuk might be the 4th horseman in terms of young and up-and-coming contenders at light heavyweight. Now, the very next fight is another really exciting light heavyweight fight between Ion Cutelaba and Khalil Roundtree. And if you don't know Ion Cutelaba, he is just one of the most intimidating fighters in the entire sport. He loves to just get in people's faces at the weigh-ins. In the pre-fight, I remember in the pre-fight, one of his fights, he when they were announcing his name, he walked all the way across the octagon, got about this close to the other guy's face while they were doing the announcements in the pre-fight, presenting in the red corner, and while they were announcing him, he just walked up to this guy and just to freaking intimidate him before the fight. He is just an absolute monster, very scary guy. And he's only 25 years old as well, so another guy who's a potential up-and-comer in the light heavyweight division. And he's taking on Khalil Roundtree, who in his last fight just looked sensational. Khalil Roundtree looks like he could be, one of these up-and-coming contenders. He's 29. His last fight against Eric Anders, his kicks were just out of this world, man. He chewed up Anders' leg in that fight. And, Khalil has been training in Thailand, living with the Thais, living at the gym, just embedded himself in as a real Muay Thai striker, and he looks like a world-class Thai striker in there. The amount that he's been able to develop in this short period of time since he's been, training in Thailand has been just something special to see. And, it's really exciting to see if he's made another big jump forward in skill level, because, between 2 fights ago and 1 fight ago, he made an enormous leap forward in terms of his tactical striking proficiency. And if he's done that again, he's going to be real trouble on the feet for anybody at 205. So that's the next fight on the card, another banger. All right, now the next fight on the card is Gunnar Nelson versus Gilbert Burns. And I gotta say, off the bat, Gunnar Nelson is literally one of my favorite fighters in the entire UFC. I just love everything about the way that this guy fights. He's just emotionless, and totally like just deadpan as he walks into the octagon. You've never seen anybody just be truly emotionless and like the way that he is. He's never high, he's never low, he's always just centered perfectly. Like he's like a monk or something, man. It's actually so sick. And then he he has this a really interesting karate style. The way he fights on the feet, he's just flowing like water, man. Like he's so calm and cool and collected. And then on top of that, his exciting karate style in the feet is that he's actually an insane grappler. Like he once beat Jeff Monson in a jiu-jitsu grappling match. And Jeff Monson is, if you've never seen Jeff Monson, he is like just a fire hydrant heavyweight of a guy. Like he's like 260 or something, just built like a brick shithouse. And Gunnar Nelson was able to out-grapple him. Gunnar Nelson, this fight's a welterweight fight. Gunnar's an undersized welterweight. Like he walks around at like 175, 180, barely cuts any weight at all to make the 170 limit. And the guy he's fighting, Gilbert Burns, is a 3-time world BJJ champion. Like that's rare type of BJJ to be in mixed martial arts, especially at this highest level. So if Gunnar can hang with him on the ground, which I think he can, man, Gunnar is such a talented grappler. It's gonna really open up people's eyes to just truly how phenomenal Gunnar is in the grappling of mixed martial arts. And the interesting thing about Gilbert Burns is he's got legitimate one-punch knockout power, like just, make you face plant type of one-punch knockout power. So mixing, Gilbert Burns' one-punch devastating knockout power with Gunnar's flowy karate style on the feet, and then if they grapple, we could see one of the most high-level grappling type of matchups that you could really see in the UFC. Like one of them, I'm not saying the highest, but some extremely high-level, interesting jiu-jitsu and grappling. If this fight's on the feet, it's going to be an interest in contrasting styles of, power versus, elusiveness. And if it goes to the ground, we're going to get to see just an epic grappling match. This is the fight that I'm probably looking most forward to, except for the main event. Because like I said, I'm biased towards Gunnar. He is one of my all-time favorite fighters. I just love everything about him. I can't wait for this fight. People that say that this isn't a good card, like, what are you talking about? Now we're at the co-main event, and like I sort of teased earlier, this is the only fight on the main card that I'm not, like, super excited for. And it's nothing against the two fighters. It's just that I don't really know the two fighters. I don't know the one guy at all. And the other guy is, I see why he's in the co-main event. He's making his UFC debut. His name's Mark Madsen, I should say. He's 8-0, former silver medalist in Greco-Roman wrestling. So this guy is a legit grappler. And he's a Danish fighter, like I said. He's making his UFC debut as an 8-0 guy. So he could be a really exciting prospect. He's a little bit older. He's like 36 or so. So, he's got to act fast and, and be good right away if he wants to, make a run at a title or a top 10 type of position in the UFC. But, I'm excited. I'm excited to see Mark Madsen compete, just in case he is, a next up and coming guy. And, seeing that kind of grappling, silver medalist from the Olympics, bro, like that's a rare thing to see in mixed martial arts. So, I'm excited to watch this guy compete. And then an exciting thing about, fights that you you don't know a lot about the fighters in is like your expectations are low. All these other fights I've talked about, how I imagine the each fighter performing and stuff. I don't really, other than I guess Mark Madsen's probably going to toss this guy around, his opponent around a bunch. But besides that, I don't really have much of an idea of how this fight's going to go. So the thing, so you can always, when you don't really know how the two fighters are going to match up and stuff, anything that happens, if anything exciting happens, it's all a surprise. So it's all like a cherry on top. And the rest of this card is so stacked, and then there's a phenomenal main event right after it. I'm not upset about this being in the co-main at all. And now we're at the main event of the evening, folks. It's Jack the Joker Hermansson versus J.E.T, the Killer Gorilla Cannonier. And man, this is just a great matchup, and it's an extremely high stakes matchup. The winner of this fight is going to be essentially one fight away from contending for the middleweight title. So Israel Adesanya and Robert Whittaker are competing for the middleweight title here in a couple weeks in Melbourne, Australia. And the winner of that fight is going to take on Paulo Costa is going to get the next crack at the middleweight title after those two guys compete. That's sort of already set in stone. But whoever wins this fight is going to be given, Yoel Romero, or the loser of Whittaker and Adesanya, or maybe Kelvin Gastelum if he looks phenomenal and gets a big win against Darren Till, like a big knockout against Darren Till or something. They're going to be taking on one of those three guys. Those are the only guys left above them in the division, and if they win that fight, then that's going to be their number one contender shot. So this is like you're not like an eliminator for the next number one contender shot for these guys. And it's just a great matchup. Let's talk about what these guys both do well. Jack Hermansson, I think he is the most well-rounded middleweight in the UFC and thus in the world, I would say. He has just phenomenal timing with his wrestling. He knows how to time his shots, off of your offense, similar to a GSP type. He's nowhere near GSP, but it's similar to that. He knows how to duck under the punches to time his double legs. His ground and pound, he says he has the most vicious ground and pound in the sport. He has some freaking great ground and pound. I don't mind him staking a claim for the title. He's up there with some of the best ground and pound in the sport, some of the best top control in the sport. He fought Jacare Souza and Thales Leites, two of the best jiu-jitsu grapplers in the entire sport of mixed martial arts, and he was willing to go down, to take them down and fight them on the ground and try to implement his own ground and pound. That kind of confidence when you're going up against true world-class submission specialists like those guys is just next level, man. And he went for a guillotine on freaking Jacare, which is just ridiculous. Like, he tried to sub Jacare and he damn near had it. He's got extremely long arms, 77.5 inch reach, which is just ridiculous for a man his height. It's actually the exact same reach as J.E.T Cannonier, who also just has ridiculous long arms, So Jack Hermansson, he knows how to use his length. Like, if you watch that fight versus Jacare, he was just peppering Jacare with that jab all night and using his range so phenomenal. And then he's got a full plethora of diverse kicking attacks as well. Like, he kicks with a front kick to the body. He kicks with high kicks. He'll throw a question mark kick. He can throw leg kicks. He really does it all. He's extremely well-rounded. His cardio is out of this world. Like, his work rate in a 5-round fight against Jacare was mind-blowing. Like, when you watch that fight with him and Jacare, you're like, oh, Hermansson is like a legitimate title contender. Like, he might do work on everybody in the division. And then J.E.T Cannonier, man, the Killer Gorilla. That is an accurate nickname. This guy is just a physical beast. His physicality is second to none in the middleweight division. He's a guy who fought at heavyweight for most of his career, got to the UFC, fought at heavyweight for a couple of fights, dropped to light heavyweight, fought at light heavyweight for a bunch of fights, and then dropped to middleweight, dude. And his physicality is just next level, dude. Next level. He just ragdolls people. The way that he just shrugged David Branch off of him time and time again. David Branch was trying to maul him from the start of their fight in Jared Cannonier's middleweight debut. And David Branch is a guy who competed at 205. So he also is a guy who competed as a bigger middleweight and felt the physicality of bigger fighters. David Branch went the distance with Rumble Johnson, for God's sakes. And Jared Cannonier just ragdolled David Branch. You know, the way David would take him down at the start of the fight, David just tried relentlessly to take Cannonier down, and he took him down a few times, but every time, you know, Cannonier just got back to his feet and it was just shrugged him off, and you know, David just like, okay, and I'm gonna go for the takedown again, and Cannonier's like, all right, and shrug him off. Like, his physicality is just second to none in the middleweight division. Like, it's light years beyond anybody's physicality. And then he's got serious one-punch knockout power. He's got the most thunderous, ferocious leg kicks at middleweight. You know, he freaking just tore Anderson Silva's knee apart with leg kicks. And he's got just violent, aggressive ground and pound. Like, when he gets you hurt, he's just pours it on. You know, so he's just going to be looking to just shrug off Jack Hermansson's wrestling attempts, and he's going to look to just land bombs. And he's only had 2 fights at middleweight so far, and he's just looked like such a world beater. It's going to be really interesting to watch him against a guy in Jack Hermansson, who also has just looked like a world beater as of recently, and see what the upper limit is on Jared Cannonier. Like, if Cannonier just ragdolls Hermansson again, like, then Cannonier is like the new scariest guy in the middleweight division. Like, Yoel Romero move over, scariest guy in the division is Cannonier. Like I said, he's just a physical freak for the division, and he's just got big, long arms, extreme knockout power with his hands. You know, he's fought at heavyweight, for God's sakes, and didn't look weak or small up at heavyweight. So him at middleweight is it just seems like a cheat code. The fact that David Branch was able to take him down a few times in that first round, even though Cannonier was able to just, you know, seemed like it effortlessly, you know, get up anytime he was taken down, and took absolutely zero damage from David Branch anytime Branch did take him down. You know, the fact that David Branch was just able to get the takedowns at all, you know, makes me feel like Hermansson, you know, is a bit of a better fighter, and he can mix it up and be a lot, and, you know, he can learn from David Branch's mistakes, you know. So ultimately, Hermansson is going to look to be unpredictable and mix it up, time his takedowns intelligently, not just, you know, press forward and just shoot for takedowns willy-nilly. He's going to look to, you know, duck under the punches and time his takedowns really, really well. He's going to look to utilize his preposterous top control, maybe the best top control in the middleweight division, you know, some of the best ground and pound in the middleweight division. But his ground and pound is, like, great in volume, and it is great in power, but the kind of power that Jared Cannonier can deliver with his ground and pound is just frightening. It is truly frightening stuff. So, I mean, this main event is an amazing one, dude. It is phenomenal. It's got high stakes. It's featuring 2 extremely talented fighters, and the guy in Jared Cannonier, we have no, like, what his upper limit of capabilities are, we really don't know. We're just starting to scratch the surface of it. So, I mean, he could be an absolute world beater, and Hermansson has looked like a world beater as of recently. So, I mean, this is as high level, basically, as you can get in the middleweight division outside of, the title right now, like Izzy and Whitaker. That is, one of the best fights of the year. But whoever wins this fight is going to be in line to take on a title shot, take on a number one contender fight, and then a title shot in early 2020. And, I just can't wait to see how this main event plays out. I think I'm leaning Hermansson right now. But, man, I wouldn't be surprised if Cannonier just KOs him, TKOs him in vicious, aggressive fashion, and is the next big thing at middleweight. All right, guys, so that does it for this episode of Joel Empey Talks Mixed Martial Arts. Thank you very much for watching or listening. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Please like the video. Please comment below. I would appreciate any comments. I love to reply to them, so don't hesitate. Comment below. Follow me at Empey Talks on Twitter. That'll be in the description box below. And until next time, cheers, friends.